Allow me to break the ice. My name is Freeze. Learn it well, for it's the chilling sound of your doom. Here's your look at the brand new McFarlane Toys DC Multiverse. Batman and Robin build a figure Mr. Freeze. The Dark Knight battles his greatest threats yet, the cold-hearted Mr. Freeze, the venomous Poison Ivy, and the unstoppable brute known only as Bane. Batman finds himself at odds with his crime-fighting comrade Robin, no longer satisfied with his role as a sidekick. As Mr. Freeze threatens to unleash a new ice age upon the citizens of Gotham City, the dynamic duo, now joined by the heroic newcomer Batgirl, must learn to work as a team before Gotham City is put on ice. There's no way you're sending this cold-hearted criminal to the cooler. Of course, before we get a closer look at the build of figure Mr. Freeze and the one accessory that the figure comes included with over the last four reviews, thank you for all those that have been tuning in to this Bat channel. We have, of course, been taking the parts that came included with those figures and slowly, not always successfully, building Mr. Freeze. And now, of course, that the figure's finally done, he stands at about 7.5 inches in height, or the figure's going to be about 19 centimeters tall. All right, everyone, chill. Let's bring in now the other figures we've already had a look at. First, of course, here's what he looks like with the George Clooney Batman. And off to the side, stay cool, bird boy. Here's what he also looks like with Robin. Mr. Freeze, as you notably can see, is going to be a taller figure. He also was quite a lot taller in the movie as well, just basically by the little longer shoes. The lifts that he had in his feet gave him a little more extra height over, of course, Batman and Robin. Figures also we can bring in as well. One of my favorite from this line is actually Poison Ivy. In fact, actually, all the figures, really, to be fair, have been really good. Here's what the figure also as well looks like with Batgirl. The Iceman cometh, and a couple of other variations of Mr. Freeze as well. I'm going to bring in a couple of right now that we've gotten from McFarlane's team. Now, one on either side of them, one of my personal favorites being, of course, the Page Punchers release of Mr. Freeze. They're all Victor Freeze, but completely differently designed suits. This one did get a variation that was based more on the Kenner colors. I would love to get my hands on that one at some point. And this one also came included as a sketched version. As it is right now, we only have the one build-a-figure release of Arnie's Mr. Freeze, but I would love to see this guy get released as a gold label edition, perhaps including as well his wings and the goggles that he has at the beginning of the movie. For Victor Freeze's accessories, the figure in fact comes included with a freeze gun. The freeze gun has been molded in a very similar silver plastic as his armored suit. One thing I really liked that McFarlane Toys did was include a freeze effect that can be detached. Ironically enough, though, it attaches by a diamond-shaped peg. Can you see the inside of the nozzle? Perhaps I shouldn't be pointing the freeze gun directly at you, but it is, in fact, it looks to be a diamond shape. I'm sure that is only just accidental. Speaking of diamonds, though, in the movie, of course, he charges his suit by diamonds. The figure, of course, doesn't include any. I'm tempted to go to my Michael's store. That's a craft store here in Canada. Get myself some artificial jewels. I've gone to people's houses, honestly, without a word of a lie, and there has been bowls with artificial stones inside. Who just decides to put out a bowl of artificial jewels? Get myself, though, oversized diamonds and have them displayed with Mr. Freeze until eventually make it another release of this guy from McFarlane's team. But anyways, this does plug in place. One thing I do like about it is that they use translucent blue plastic. I don't maybe like as much the fact that they decided to paint the end of it more in a frosted blue paint, because it does lose, of course, a little bit of that freeze effect. It does give a much more richer blue, but it comes at the expense, unfortunately, of losing that translucent blue plastic as I continue to wave my hand behind it. The freeze gun, though, does attach into Mr. Freeze's hands by benefit of having two actual gripping hands instead of a closed fist, one gripping hand. I mean, obviously, if he has two handles, he wields the gun in the movie with two handles. You'd like to think the figure does also have that as well, and it does. Picking the figure up, though, one thing I will say is it does have some tolerance issues when it comes to his joints. The joints, more specifically in his legs, are ones that always frequently fall off the figure. I've done my best to kind of get that as much in there as I can, and I'm hoping it's going to stay in place for the rest of this review, but I'm already giving you guys a warning. The plastic for the handle of the gun is a soft plastic, and yet the plastic that they use for his hands are actually more of a harder plastic. So really, putting the two together can be a lot more difficult than it sounds. Prying the plastic a little bit away from his palm. There we go. Get the handle in one side. Then we'll just, of course, bend the elbow. There we go. Popping the handle back out. Bring the arm around. And then, of course, you can take your other hand. Maybe I'll do it on this side first, because that seems to be always the easiest handle to do. Get that back in his hand. Get that back in his hand. Get that back in his hand. Again, I don't know why I'm having so many issues. It's simply just taking a handle and getting it into his hand. And yet, do I have it all the way on there? Why am I struggling so much to get Mr. I had no problems with this before. And, of course, now the cameras are hitting record. Now it's going to have so many more issues. Anyways, just plugging that in. There we go. Finally. Mr. Freeze does have now the freeze gun in his hand. I still have that handle falling out of the hand, but you get the idea. And again, if you really wanted to, you could really just remove the freeze effect on the end and just have the nozzle completely non-firing. But I do think it adds a little something, a little extra pizzazz when it comes to displaying the figure. With all the hassle and all the stress, I just had to just try to get the gun in his blasted hands. Let's remove the gun, at least for right now. We're going to put it off to the side. Getting a closer look at Mr. Freeze, especially first with his head, I think it bears a very strong likeness to Arnold Schwarzenegger. I hope you will agree. The coloring of his face is, of course, blue like it would be in the movie. It has maybe less of the sparkling glitter that he would have for his makeup, but overall, it's a really nice likeness and bearing a very strong likeness to Arnold Schwarzenegger. Of course, the helmet that he has in the movie is one of the more ridiculous aspects of Mr. Freeze. It kind of looked less like Mr. Freeze for me, and like just more like an angry construction worker, like he was wearing a construction helmet on his head. For that, though, it's been nicely painted. The silver on the sides and the silver on the top has been nicely done. I will say I'm not as crazy about the idea that they decided to go the route of using translucent blue plastic for everything. In the movie, this would have been illuminated, but it really is only illuminated on the top. This is the part that really is the most blue. The rest of it really does stay behind as being clear plastic. And I feel they probably should have done maybe something similar, making this more of a clear plastic and only really frosting the top in blue paint. I feel like perhaps it's the one thing that's a bit of a detractor to this figure, is that there's just so much blue happening for the actual dome that he wears on his head. Other than that, though, it's a good-looking head sculpt, and again, a fine likeness to Arnold Schwarzenegger. One other thing I have, other than, of course, the tolerance issues when it came to his legs, is that the shoulder pads on the back, these things are always prone to popping off. They're soft plastic, which makes things a lot easier when it comes to bringing the arms out, for example, but these are always ones that fall out frequently. Maybe if they had made the peg a little bit longer, maybe made the hole a little bit deeper, may have made things a little bit easier to attach these in place. You think that they're in place right now, and while it may look like they are, the moment, again, you start to bring the arms out, these things are always prone to popping out. Now, I can hear somebody already in the back of the crowd saying, well, why couldn't you just glue those in place? You could, but one thing it would then lose is the posability aspect, because really this is supposed to be something that hinges out to go along with the motion of his arms. As a small little detail, I like this on the back of his behind. Not that I really want to be drawing a lot of attention to Mr. Freeze's frozen behind, but I don't know if it's intentional, but doesn't the back of it look like something from Mega Man, Dr. Wily? It looks even just like a little skeleton. I don't know if it's supposed to look like a skull, but if it is, really nice attention to details. Okay, we can now stop looking at Mr. Freeze's body bum. Speaking of his bodies, though, I mean, one of the problems going with silver plastic is the fact that there is going to be a little bit of marbling that's happening. I mean, to look at the figure's body, there really is so much detail happening on it anyways that it's kind of hard to really stop for a second and see if there's anything that's marbled. I do notice that this little section on the back of his body, and I've noticed a few little areas there on his shoulders, but overall, for what marbling I was expecting to see on this figure, there really isn't much at all being delivered here on Mr. Freeze. A lot of color, but the color is only really in these areas here. So you get the frosted blue in the front, the frosted blue on the shoulders, down below here also in the legs, and down below as well here for the boots. In the movie, these would have been clear and only then illuminate on the outer area. Now, obviously, they couldn't have illuminated the figure, but I wonder if they could have maybe used a clear plastic. I know that's a lot of extra things that they would have had to have done differently to the figure and only just outlined this section in blue. I mean, I guess to look at it, really, the blue brings a lot more detailing to it. If they had only just outlined it, it would have then made a figure look really less painted, and there's certainly a lot more silver plastic at play here. Overall, again, like, it's a nice looking Mr. Freeze. My only thing really as a takeaway is that kind of the construction of the figure. I don't want to say it's a mess. It's not a mess. Putting him together really wasn't so much of an issue until I got to like his lower legs. Basically, like from the lower torso down is really where I had a lot more of the problems. For example, like this section, his trunks are a softer plastic. It makes things obviously a lot easier when it comes to hiding the joints. It makes things a lot harder, though, when it comes to attaching the legs. And there's always seems to be a gap space between this section and this section here. A lot of times you'll find like this lower part of the torso will droop, even revealing more of a gap between the abdomen section and his trunks. So you might see myself frequently. You might see me actually doing this a lot in the review. It's just sort of shimmying up the trunks to give us a little more of a seamless look. But again, like the legs are really the biggest thing. The legs do attach, for all intents and purposes, fairly easy. But every so often, as I'm moving the figure's legs around, especially if I move them out like this, I'm probably going to tell you in advance, they may pop off. You never know, they might not. But I can already see, like, there's one leg. It's starting to get really, really loose. It's supposed to really plug in place with one peg here, one hole there. I mean, it's simple shapes, guys. And yet, ironically, it never really stays properly in place. So I'm going to, again, run through the articulation, hoping that the legs are going to at least stay for the remainder of this review. The head is going to be on a ball joint, so of course Arnie's head does rotate back and forth. It looks up only about that far, and it looks down as well. And of course you can also rock it back and forth too. Upper torso is going to be on a ball joint. The lower torso is going to be on a ball joint, but yeah, it's just a bit of a mess down below, basically from the waist down. Shoulders easily come out 90 degrees, and the points that I mentioned earlier about gluing these in place, I mean, really, if you glued them in place, what would end up happening is you'd either glue them down here, and you would really be able to move his arms. I guess if you really glued them right, like flat to the rest of the figure's torso, for all intents and purposes, I suppose you could still bring the arms out at 90 degrees. The only thing that would be a little bit more limited is bringing his arms forward and back. But if you really have no plans to ever do a full rotation on Arnie's arms, then yeah, you probably could just glue these here, glue it on the front and the back and the peg, and just permanently attach the shoulders. I might even consider doing that. I mean, again, like I don't need the arm to go any further than that. It's not like he's going to be doing jumping jacks on my shelf. I don't know. I might just glue them back, and I might just glue it here and might just glue it there. That way I know at least one thing is fixed on the figure. The shoulders are never going to come off. The arms do come out 90 degrees. Again, there's no swivel, it seemed, on the shoulders. There's also that little socket joint on the inside there as well. Normally that socket joint would only just be kind of smooth plastic. A little additional attention to detail is that they decided to make this a little more ribbed, just to give it a little more added, again, an added sculpt to the figure. So while he doesn't have a swivel here for the bicep, the figure does have a single hinge in his elbow. It does at least allow the arm to rotate back and forth, and the hands rotate all the way around. And of course, just take that same idea and match it over there as well. Here's the part that gets the most messy. I mean, obviously this part here is a softer plastic. The whole idea really, again, in mind is it's supposed to hide the joints. But again, like when you are attaching the legs, are they going to stay this time? Maybe they will. When you attach the legs, they're fine for a while, but then the moment you start to really move things around, like moving the legs forward is really the time that the legs pop off the most frequently. And again, I'll have to just kind of plug those back in place. I feel like I keep putting enough pressure on these so that they'll stay properly in place, and yet they always keep falling off on me. There normally would be a swivel at the top of the thigh, just by the way that's attached in place. The figure does have a single hinge in the knee. The lower leg does rotate, and he does have an ankle pivot back and forth. It kind of actually has a little bit like RoboCop feet, back and forth this way, and the figure does have toe articulation as well. If you can overlook the one real, I don't want to say glaring issue, because it's a simple issue. It's not like something's necessarily broken on the figure. It's something I can easily go back. I can easily attach onto the legs. It's more hassle than anything else. What it wasn't certainly a hassle was looking at the remaining of these figures. So again, we're bringing back in Batman here, George Clooney Batman. By the way, I've got these guys all on display stands. I just found it was a lot easier to get these guys to stand a little bit better than what they were. Had, of course, look at Mr. Freeze. We looked at Robin from the Mr. Freeze wave, Poison Ivy, and of course we also had a look at Batgirl. Nice lineup of figures. I mean, we only really had 4 figures, and that was all that was really needed to build Mr. Freeze. Now that, of course, we do finally have this mold well, I don't have this mold, but McFarlane Toys has this mold in their inventory. You never know. You never know. We did get ourselves technically to other Bane. While people just would have assumed that was the only way to get the Nolan-verse Bane, we eventually got that guy a slightly shorter release of Bane with a trench coat. Could something be very similar in the future of Mr. Freeze, that we might get ourselves a gold label edition of Mr. Freeze? If that is the case, I'm sure that would be a prime time, a perfect time to re-release the figure that has, of course, those wings that he has at the beginning of the movie when he deploys himself from sort of that Mr. Freeze pod that Batman and Robin get stuck inside. And of course, give them also as well the goggles. That would be certainly a cool touch, an additional feature that I would love to see for maybe a future release using this same mold. Mr. Freeze would tell you in this universe, there's only one absolute that everything freezes. Well, I can tell you from the person behind the camera, there's one absolute when it comes to action figure collecting. If you're having problems with pegs, simply heat them up. I went back, took a little bit of hot water in a cup. I submerged the pegs from the tops of the thighs in that hot water, gave it the college try, put a lot more pressure against those legs, and then sure enough, wouldn't you know it, they popped properly in place. If you already have this figure and you're thinking like, hey, what's this guy's problem? I was fine. I was able to get the legs properly in there. They've yet to fall off. Problem's now solved, everybody. Problem is now solved. The legs aren't going to be going anywhere in Mr. Freeze, and now he can go in his clunky and merry little way. Clunky and chunky certainly was the suit in the film. I mean, it's a little more of a ridiculous suit. It was part Mr. Freeze, part construction worker, and of course you got Arnold Schwarzenegger rhyming off all these cold one-liners. But I gotta say, like, it translates really nice to a figure. I mean, there isn't a lot of paint, honestly. I mean, when you're looking at this, you can easily see that they've used really mostly just silver molded plastic. Some of the marbling, of course, goes hand in hand when you're using like silvers and golds. There's only very little of that, obviously, here on Mr. Freeze, but he looks good. The paint, what we get at least of it, is cleanly applied. I like the coloring and the likeness of his head sculpt. If anything could be offered up as a criticism, obviously outside of the legs and the shoulder pads frequently falling off, but from a cosmetic standpoint, maybe had not used as much dark blue plastic when it came to the dome on his helmet. I think if instead rather they had used a more clear plastic, or at the very least a very, very light blue plastic, because I feel it competes a little bit with his face. His face already has a really nice likeness, and it has, I feel, a proper coloring that it has to the way he looks in the movie. I don't know if I would have used as much of a dark blue, because I feel it competes a little bit with Mr. Freeze's face. Other than that, though, good looking figure. What do you guys think of Mr. Freeze? Let me know down below in the comment section. Have you guys been collecting the Batman and Robin wave? And if you have, what's your favorite figure from this line? Let me know down below in the comments section. Also, hey, as well, if you guys enjoyed this video, want to hit with a like. If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing, and you certainly do want to stick around for more, sad news to report, unfortunately, is, well, we are wrapping up as anybody that's been taking a tally already. We've already looked at the 4 figures. We looked at the BAF figure. That's the Build-A-Figure from this wave. Of course, we all know now we've wrapped up things for the Batman and Robin line, but there's definitely going to be a lot more Mr. Freeze. There's definitely a lot more Mr. Freeze. There's definitely going to be a lot more McFarlane Toys, DC Multiverse reviews. So if that's the kind of thing you like to come back to this channel for, do come back, please, and thank you. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.